Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the ACUA Special Interest Group. Our topic today is IDEA Financial Activity Tool. I am Lindsay Falconer with Automation Services, the U.S. distributor of IDEA Data Analysis Software and Caseware Monitor. I will be monitoring this session and the Q&A at the end. Our presenter today is Erin Baker, the Data Analytics Specialist with the University of Texas System Administration Internal Audit Team. She provides data analytic related services and support to internal audit departments around the system, including developing tools for use with their data, establishing a formal training curriculum, and assisting with data acquisition and analytics during audits. We are very excited for her to share with us a portion of her process today. If you have any questions, please type them in the questions tab on the right side of the screen. Most questions will be answered at the end of the webcast. Yes, we are recording the session and we will send out the slides and videos in the next few days. We are not offering CPE for this presentation. We have a lot to cover today and I'm excited to introduce Erin as our speaker. I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everybody. I'm Erin Baker. As Lindsay said, I work with University of Texas System, specifically out of the System Administration offices. Today, I'll be talking about one of the tools that we've created. It's the Financial Activity tool. And then as well, at the very end, we'll talk about scheduling using the task scheduler. Just so you know, primarily it will be about the tool. So if you came looking to hear about the task scheduler, again, just so you know, it'll be at the end. We'll do a simple creation of a task, and we'll actually try and run it so that we can see it in place. So let's move on. Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much about the University of Texas system itself. We can all go out and find the facts about the system. But in terms of tool development, there are some facts and considerations that are primary when we think about what tool we're going to create next. So we have 14 institutions, which means that we have 14 different audit plans. Each of our institutions has an audit office located at the institution, and they do make their own audit plans. We have academic, health, and then we have system administration. With each of the institutions, they're either on a shared implementation of certain applications or they're completely different applications. So for example, for PeopleSoft, most of the institutions all use PeopleSoft, but we're on different implementations. However, 7 or 8 of us actually are on the same implementation. So when it comes to tool development, I will say that the fact that 8 of us share that implementation means that I'll use PeopleSoft from that implementation to design the tool and then work around that initial scripting to make it customized for any of the other institutions. So when we're thinking about tool development, we're looking at those audit plans. We're trying to determine if there are any common between all of the institutions or a vast majority of the institutions. So for example, maybe a travel and entertainment, that's pretty common across all of our institutions. We also have ProCard, which I think probably most people on the call here know. ProCard is very common to use for analytics. So we'll look at the plans and look for commonalities. Next, we'll also consider, just like I said with the applications of shared and disparate applications, that if they are shared, if it's PeopleSoft, more likely we're going to pick some kind of process, some kind of area that the tool will focus on that we can do with those shared systems. So for the financial activity tool, what's the purpose of it? It's really just a general tool to be used by the user to get basic summaries of activities related to multiple financial processes. We'll talk about which processes those are just a couple slides here. The initial thoughts for the use of the tool was these change in management audits, because The thought being the auditor would go in, and before starting the audit, they want to get an idea of what's going on in the department. What kind of transactions are going on? Are there high-dollar transactions? Are there low-dollar transactions? Are there a lot of transfers, et cetera, et cetera? So this tool will look at the 6 processes that are coming up and give the auditor an idea of what's going on. And then also, I could see this being used in risk assessment development. Again, this deals with the financial activities, and as we all know, financial activities create a lot of risk sometimes. So again, this will give an overview for the auditors of what's going on either in a particular department or across the university or the institution. I can definitely see other uses for the tool. I will say that as I was creating this presentation, I was thinking a lot of different ways that it could already be upgraded and improved. So if I remember those as I'm talking about this particular topic, I will mention that in case anybody's interested in creating their own tool, and they might want to take some of those comments into consideration. So I wasn't sure on this phone call if what the interest is. So like, are people on here because they're interested in the scripting? Or are they on because they're interested in what kind of analyses are in the tool? I'm guessing it's probably a mix of both of those. I'm guessing there are also maybe people on here that are brand new to IDEA. So I wanted to talk not only about the analyses that are in the tool, but also some of the features of the tool that were accomplished using the scripting. So for example, it's institution specific, and we'll look at some of these menus and screenshots of what I mean by these. Institution specific, it's menu driven, it's customizable to the scope of the audit or the project, accommodates multiple modes of data acquisition. There's user management of outliers for voucher comparisons. We'll look at that a little bit later. And then automatic exports to Excel with pivot tables and pivot charts created for the user. And I will note that this tool was created before version 10 came out, so that's why we don't have visuals in IDEA. Okay, so just for some examples. So I mentioned that this was institution specific. So here we can see over here on the left, we have a drop-down menu created using the scripting so that the institution can choose where they're at. And this would give the opportunity to script so that it's more customizable to that institution. So for example, if I was picking UT Arlington, maybe UT Arlington has a different way of recording their deposits or of recording their airfare, how it's paid for their travel and entertainment. So being able to choose the institution will then allow the script to basically traffic cop and send the program to another part of that script that can run according to what the institution was. Then over here we have this menu. So we have the analyses choices. So here they can choose to look at any of these processes. So again, the processes I mentioned we're going to look at are going to be the cash advances, expense reimbursement, vouchers, deposits, the journal, and then also paychecks and earnings. So those are the 6 options that the user can choose from. They can choose just one, they can choose all 6. Here we have a date range. So for this tool, the user can actually, well, let me start down here. Down here is the data source. So it's asking, are you going to use the ODBC connection or not? So if they are going to use ODBC, obviously they click yes, and the script will take care of going directly to the databases to pull the data. Now, if they say no, then that means that they chose to get their queries out of PeopleSoft using the Query Manager. And when they run their queries, these are queries that I've written so that it will be in the right format for the tool. They choose what dates they want to run, but they can also choose to further limit that if they have a reason to do that by entering in the dates here. But this is also to drive the ODBC acquisition. And then down here, the user has the choice, if they would like, to only do the analysis for a particular department. So this would be the case if they're doing like a change in management or some kind of departmental audit. If they don't put anything in the department code, then all of the data for the entire institution will be pulled and will be run through the analysis or run through the tool. So here we have some user prompts, conditional messaging, and just progress messaging that will present to the user. Over here on the left, we have user prompting. So this is prompting the user to go and find their data file. I will say for anybody that is thinking about doing this, I'm still kind of torn on which way is best for, well, I think the best way is ODBC because that's direct. But beyond that, if the best way is to have the user save their files in a particular place by a particular name so that you can script and call it by name and just do the relative referencing to the project file, or is it best to say to the user, you can save your data wherever you want, you'll be prompted to go and look for it. So I'm torn because sometimes any instructions that are given aren't necessarily read through all the time. So they might miss the instructions about naming it a particular way, so that would cause the program to crash. But then on the other hand, if they're having to choose their file, number one, this automatically negates the availability of doing this on an automated fashion because it wouldn't know where to look for, the data because it's prompting the user to do it. So I'm torn. So I'll just put that out there for anybody that is thinking about it. Just think about those things and what your purpose is, and hopefully that'll get you to your answer. Over here on the right, we have just some conditional messaging, and this example here is saying that a workbook was created for output, but there were no records to actually analyze, given the department that was entered and the date range that was entered. There wasn't anything to analyze. So instead of the program, instead of the script just not giving any kind of output to the user, so the user then is not sure if it actually worked right or not. This way they get a message so they know it did work. It didn't just skip over what it was supposed to do. It just keeps communication open with the user. And then finally, down at the bottom, this is just progress messaging. Periodically throughout the tool, it'll let the user know, in this case, table deletions are complete. For this particular tool, I did this at the very beginning of the tool so that when the user gets their data in, all previous tables that were in that project are deleted, so we're starting for sure, brand new, no questions, as opposed to doing this at the end of the tool, where if you did that, all the tables would be erased and it wouldn't be available for the user if they decided they wanted to go back and look at any of the intermediate tables. So that's an idea for your tool as well, deletions of tables so that you're starting new. Okay, so I mentioned user management of outliers on voucher analysis. So this particular analysis, which we'll get to again later, I'll go into it more, is a summary of vendors and looking at different turnaround times for invoice and payment and entries. So my concern about doing these calculations of the turnarounds and then doing like a comparison across the institution to the other invoices that are getting paid from other vendors. The issue, of course, is going to be when you have outliers like this. If you look down just this little excerpt, we can see that probably these first four could be considered outliers. So in order to try and minimize any I don't want to call it undue influence, but any undue influence by these vouchers, by these vendors that have such a large number of vouchers, it's going to skew any calculations on turnaround time. And particularly on these are student refunds and they're processed right away. So that's definitely going to throw off any kind of calculation. So in an attempt to get rid of that, I did this in the scripting to where when it gets to this point, it will sort or index, as you can tell by the red arrow on the table, index the table so that it's descending order. So the largest on top and the smallest on bottom. So that way, when we get this window to come up for the user, do you have outliers to extract before calculating your averages? This is available to show who has the most on the very top so that they can see the highest number of vouchers to determine if it's unreasonably high for it to be included in the population. So if you say yes, then you get a window that says, okay, how many outliers do you have? Then it will come down and we'll say use the following input boxes. So this is using the input box scripting to enter the vendor set ID and vendor ID for the outliers. So basically, you'll get this vendor entry window, and if you have 4, it's going to show up 4 times. So you'll enter your information, click OK, and then it'll come up again, and then again, and then again. And then you go on, and you have your calculations without any of the outliers that you took out. So that's another feature of the tool, and probably something I'd like to look more into including more, because it does give the user more control over their data and their analysis. Okay, so now that we're done talking about the features, now let's actually talk about what's in the tool. As I mentioned just a little bit ago, it includes information on advances, the expense reimbursements, vouchers, deposits, general ledger, and the paycheck and earnings. So I'm not going to go through every single example of the summaries or analyses that are in the tool, because there are quite a few. And I think most of them, just by the name, you guys are going to know what it is, and I don't think you'll really need to see an example of it. But there are some that I'll talk a little bit more about, and perhaps put up just an example screenshot, just so you can see what the information looks like, how it's played out. So first of all, for the advances, every process that this tool looks at will pop out a detailed report. So on these slides, the first thing you're going to see on all of the processes is a detailed report. So this is just the raw data. This is just the raw data that will export into Excel, and it gives the user the ability to do further research using just the raw data, or they can post that into their work papers as the source data. Then we have this employee advance status. So what this will do is it displays the total number of advances that the employee has received, again, in that time period, the number of advances paid back, the number of advances outstanding, the total of outstanding advances, and the percentage of advances still outstanding. So here's just a screenshot of an example of one. I did have to take off employee numbers and such. But here we have the number of advances going down, number outstanding, not outstanding, excuse me, number outstanding, and then the outstanding balance and your percentage outstanding. So why would you want to know this? Well, particularly if you're doing a department audit, you want to know about, well, I would want to know about the turnaround time for these advances, because basically it's a loan. It's a loan to the employee, and if they're not paying them back, and if they have a high number of advances out and it's a high balance, that might be something to look at. In addition to those two reports, we also have the outstanding advances stratification. So that I can see an opportunity to make this tool a little bit better, to include some of this information about the stratification on that previous report for the employee advances status. So for example, maybe have something talking about the oldest advance that they have that hasn't been paid, or the highest amount of their advance that hasn't been paid, if they have multiple. But this stratification will show you aging totals and counts, of the advances not yet repaid to the institution. Then you also have department totals and balances, and this is one that I think you can figure out. It's advance totals and total remaining balances by department, and then totals and balances by ID. And again, that's just total and remaining balances for a particular or for each employee ID. Next, we have the expense reimbursement. And this one, I didn't go, we don't have that much in this tool for expense reimbursement because we actually have a completely separate travel and entertainment tool that was developed after this that does a more comprehensive review of expense reimbursement. And actually, I'll say something very briefly about that when we're getting through with this slide. So for the output for expense reimbursement, of course, we have that detail report. And then we have the totals by department by the GL code, and then totals by the employee ID. So another thing for any of you out there thinking about doing the tool or doing a tool, something else to consider is how you want the user interacting with, well, how you want them interacting with the data. And what I mean by that is this particular tool, as I said earlier, has automatic exports to Excel. So the user doesn't really interact necessarily with the data except for what I've already showed you with those menus and the voucher thing. But pretty much all of their results, all of their summaries, all of their raw data, all of it's already exported for them into Excel. Now with the travel and entertainment tool, we went a little bit different direction and we used the action fields. So I don't know if you know, but the action fields are those blue hyperlinks that you see in the cells when you do, for example, a summarization. And you get that number of records field, and in that field is a hyperlinked number. When you click on that hyperlinked number, then a window pops up and shows you the records that make up that that bucket, that number under number of records. But you can also use a action field to launch another script. So it's not just to display a window and show you information. You can also click on an action field and have it run a script that you've already written. So for the travel and entertainment tool, we use that technology in order to allow the user to click around and drill down into their data themselves. So when they found something they like, then they could export that information themselves. So again, that's just two different ways of doing it. One, do the exports for the user. It kind of backs, I don't want to say backs them into a corner, but it keeps them in only to where they can have what was scripted for them. But in this case, with the travel and entertainment tool, what I was telling you about with the action fields, it gives them more flexibility to do specifically what they want rather than what the scripter wrote for them. So something to think about. Next we have the vouchers. And vouchers output, again, we have the detail report, and then we have this vendor summary. So the vendor summary is what I was talking a little bit about earlier. And vendor summary will show a review for turnaround time from invoice receipt to entry, invoice receipt to payment, and entry of invoice to payment. So let's just look at an example. Again, I took off any kind of vendor IDs or vendor names. But this is just an example of what you might see. It's not sorted in any particular order or anything, but starts with showing how many vouchers that particular vendor has. So in this case, the screenshot, there's not that many for any of these. We have each of these sections, which represents one of those measurements. So the first yellow section is the invoice to entry days average. So that's the average for the vendor. Then we have the average for everybody going across, all the vendors going across the institution, except for any of the ones that you took out because they were outliers. And then we calculate a difference between that particular vendor's average and the average going across the institution. So that same principle, that same thought process is how these were also created. these calculations were averages across the institution, and then differences between the average for the institution and the average for the vendor. So as you're looking at this, you might be thinking to yourself, well, what am I looking for when I'm looking at this? What looks good, so what am I looking for? So invoice to entry days, if I were looking at this, I would be interested in any that were negative, because that would indicate that it was entered before the invoice was received. Huge deal. It shouldn't be happening because I mean, I don't think it should be happening, but it hasn't been paid yet. Maybe it was a typo. It may just be something to keep in mind and to look at that if you see other issues occurring with that same vendor. What about invoice to payment days? So again, I would be interested definitely if I saw a negative number here, because that does indicate that it was paid before the date on the invoice. So that would be an interesting situation, how we paid something without the invoice. Although I'm sure there's a case where that is perfectly acceptable and normal. I'm sure that happens somewhere. Entry to payment days. So again, same concept. This just takes all of them together. You know, I'd be looking for any that are negative. I'd be looking also for any of these on the invoice to payment where the difference is huge compared to everybody else. So like this 0, I'd be interested in this. Well, it's only one vendor, one voucher. Maybe it's not worth looking at. But what if this number of vouchers was a very large number, something in the hundreds, obviously a lot more than everybody else, and they had 0 days to payment? Maybe it's a vendor that we're keeping happy. Not sure what the situation may be, but the fact that it is so different and so short compared to what the usual turnaround time is might get me to look at that just to understand what's going on. And again, the point of the tool is to give you that information so that you can look into the activities of the department that you're looking at. And then lastly, we have the entry to payment, which we already talked about. I don't have anything particular to say about that, except that it's really just the total term for the entire process. Okay, still on the voucher output, we have voucher totals by department by month, voucher totals by department by account by month, voucher totals by department by vendor by month. So these are just all various summaries. As we get to the next analyses are included, I will say that as I was going through this, again, for this presentation, I started thinking about information I've heard on various presentations about using this kind of process to build a scorecard. So if you're doing some kind of, like a risk assessment, maybe you could determine that over a particular amount, if there's a particular department that has voucher totals over a particular amount, then it makes them riskier than another department because of their expenses. Or perhaps on some kind of vendor analysis, vendor scorecard, we could look at those turnaround times and include some kind of scoring based on the turnaround. So the lower the turnaround in comparison to everybody else, is that riskier? It could be. So again, thinking about those items, those possibilities with a scorecard is another way that you could build a tool, build a scorecard for yourself. Okay, still continuing on vouchers, we have the voucher count and totals by vendor by month, voucher count and totals by vendor by employee ID. So this one, you're reviewing for vendors who are only associated with one employee ID. So why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting because it could be just a small vendor. Absolutely, there are plenty of reasons why there would be only one employee associated with a vendor. And when I say associated with, I mean only one employee ID entering information that is attached to that vendor, so entering vouchers. So this kind of situation could indicate, again, I stress could, because again, there are so many possibilities that it's not an issue, but it could indicate that it's a fake vendor, that this particular employee has the access to create a vendor, and maybe there's no approval process in place, and they're able to get one of the vouchers all the way through without any kind of review. Amazingly, there are places where that happens. So this would give the opportunity to find those cases and determine if you want to look into it. And this, again, goes back to the possibility of having some kind of scorecard. Because if you have all of the, say you have data for 6 months, you may come out with, I don't know, maybe 500 records where this is the case, where there's a vendor that there's only one employee ID entering vouchers that are going to them. Well, you're not going to look at all 500, but how do you narrow those down more? Well, if you had some kind of scorecard, if you had some way to tie these different analyses together, that would certainly, I would think, that would certainly help you narrow down. Because if you find somebody that, a vendor that only has one employee, you go back to that vendor summary and you see that their turnaround time is much less than everybody else, which could be an indication, again, that they're fake because their vouchers are getting entered and paid right away to get it out so that nobody else is looking at it. If you have some kind of scorecard that will keep track of how many times that particular vendor shows up in these different analyses, that could help you to determine, okay, out of four different risks that we've defined for doing vendor analyses, this vendor has 3 of those. So we're going to choose to look at transactions with this vendor. Just one approach. I made a note here that I could further enhance this particular voucher count and totals by vendor by employee by adding the department data. Again, I haven't tried this. It's just something that came to me, that you could look for vendor jumping departments at the same time as an employee. Yeah, I don't know how probable this is. I was just trying to think of ways that you could identify some fraudulent situation, and I think this would be a good way to identify an interesting situation, not necessarily. But if the employee is in a particular department and that's the only employee that's entering vouchers for a vendor, all of a sudden that employee moves to a different department, and all of a sudden that department is also now having vouchers for this particular vendor. To me, that would be a huge red flag. But again, there might be a very reasonable reason for that. Voucher count of amounts by employee ID. So you review for amounts that seem to be used on a regular basis. I think this would be more for direct journal entries. Yeah, I think that would be more for direct journal entries, but you could also apply that to vouchers as if they're making regular payments to themselves as a fake vendor. I don't know. I guess it would depend on that criminal mind if they're going to keep the same amounts or if they're going to, change them up. But that is something that you could look at. Voucher totals by department, by account, by cost center, by month. So again, just a very, very fine drill down into the totals. Next, we have the deposits. Deposits are interesting for us because not everybody uses this particular module. So when we're looking for deposits, this is a case in this tool where we have to use the traffic cost, which is that institution choice, to direct the tool to run particular procedures based on the institution because they do their deposits differently. So you have the detailed report, you have your total deposits by account, and total deposits by fiscal year account. It should be fiscal year accounting period. So when you're looking at total deposits by account, what I would be looking for in that, total deposits by fiscal year accounting period, what I'd be looking for in that are any just big variances if you're looking at particular accounts, I would imagine that you would know or have some idea of which accounts would have these big variances. But other accounts, that's always something to look for. Anytime you're doing any kind of financial analysis, you're looking for variances. So that's something that you could use these summaries for. And as well with any of the summaries, as I mentioned earlier, they are exported to go into Excel so that you can get graphs. But now that IDEA has version 10 out, these are summaries that you could put directly into, or not put directly into because they're already there, but that you could use the data in IDEA's new visualization dashboards to look for very obvious variances visually. Okay, and lastly, or not lastly, second to last, we have the journal output. Again, we have a detailed report, and there's a report that will show the debit and credit totals by account by month. So that's a review summary for large discrepancies from one period to another, similar to what we just talked about from the deposit. We have the debit and credit totals by department, by account, by month. Same thing, you're looking for large discrepancies. And then here I just did a couple of screenshots of Excerpt just to show some different ways or different things that you might be looking at. So here we have, this is a revenue. I should have put the headers on there. Sorry about that. This is part of the account name. I hit part of the account name. This is the type of account, so it's a revenue account. This is going to be whether it's debit or credit. And in this case, these are all credits, which makes sense because this is a revenue account. So any increases in revenue are going to be credits. So when I see this, I don't see any large discrepancies. It seems pretty steady, and they're all credits, so that makes sense to me. Now, if we go down here, we have an expense account, and we have credits and debits, but we have some pretty large changes here. Clearly, it's something that, there's an in and out. And as I was looking at this, and I saw this number, and I'll let you know that these numbers have been changed and multiplied, and et cetera. When I look at this, though, I think, well, that's clearly pretty large. But look at the month. I'm betting that this was a closing out of the expense account for the end of the fiscal period, because this was in September. But then on the other months, we do see that it's pretty much an in and out, almost sweeping it in and out. There are some differences, but when I see this, like I said, it pops up a question, but as you think about it and understand what the situation is, the time period, then it might come to you that this is probably just a closing out of the account. But again, this is the kind of stuff that this tool is meant to do. It's supposed to get you to stop and think about what's going on in the department. To continue with the journal output, we have journal totals by account by month. So again, this is something where it's like horizontal analysis where you're looking from one period to the other. You also have journal totals by department, by account, by month, and journal totals by department, by account, by cost center, by month. So again, just very fine drilling down. So as I said earlier, with the travel and entertainment tool, that would give you the opportunity to, for example, start at journal totals by account by month. Then you could drill down further just into the account, see all the departments that are posting to that account during that month. Then you could drill down into a particular department that's listed, and you could see all of the accounting for that department for their journal entries. So just an example of how instead of exporting a ton of worksheets, a ton of Excel sheets, that you can use the action fields and give the user that power to determine what they want to export themselves. Okay, and then we have these final outputs for the journal even dollar amounts, journal line amounts by employee, journal amounts by employee ID by month, journal occurrences of employee ID and amount, counts of employee IDs to GL account, and cost center. So again, those last four, I can see those having more value and maybe providing more insight to the user if they were considered together. So it's like the scorecard type thing, that if there's a particular employee that's showing up on all of these as having multiple line amounts of the same amount, or multiple occurrences of the amount in the journal, then this will give an idea that maybe this is an employee to look at their activities. Just finally, we have the paycheck and earnings. Again, we have the detail report. Then we have totals by department, by employee type, by pay period, and date. Earnings codes, totals by department. Earnings code, totals by department, by employee ID. I believe one of our institutions used this kind of summary, not necessarily this tool, but this kind of summary, the earnings code totals, for overtime, to do some kind of analysis over the overtime earnings codes in the department, because there was a clear outlier when they did their analysis, so that gave them the opportunity to look further into the situation there. Then we also have no deductions and no taxes, and those are both possible indicators of fraudulent activity. However, no taxes. Student workers don't have taxes taken out. I believe there are foreign workers that don't have taxes taken out. There are definitely reasons, and perfectly normal, perfectly reasonable reasons why somebody wouldn't have taxes out, but it is considered a red flag, so it's something that we can look at. And same idea with the no deductions. Generally, everybody's going to have some kind of deduction, but again, there are, of course, cases where that's not the case. Okay, so the task scheduler, I think in the information that was sent out for this discussion, that it said I'd use the task scheduler for this tool. That's actually not the case. As I said earlier, when you have all of the prompting and user interaction, it's very difficult to do to have this as an automated tool, because it requires the user to touch stuff, and it requires the user to answer questions in order for the script to continue. The reason why we use the task scheduler in the past, and it was very much in the past, it was like a year ago, there is a particular process that did not have, I was trying to remember the exact situation, so I may not say this correctly, but there is a situation where the workflow within the application was not in place, so we could not see the intermediate steps between the entry of an item and the approval of the item. We wanted to see some of the intermediate. So in order to try and get those intermediate steps, I set up this task scheduler to run just an import, basically, of a table using an ODBC connection, and then ran the script so that it would compare it to the previous day and look for any changes in a particular record. And if there was a change in the record, then it listed whatever the new record was and appended whatever the old record was, so that we had the history. That was the situation that had come up that made us look at using the task scheduler. So I will show you just how to set up a basic task scheduler. We'll do a screenshot first, and if we have time, which looks like we should, I'll try to set one up so that we can just see it run. And what I have waiting in the wings to run is just a script that was, it's just a message. It's using that message box command, and it just says, like, this is a task scheduler. So when you use the task scheduler, you're going to set it to appear at a certain time. So in order to do that, you have to save the script as an executable, which you can do through IdeaScript. So when you're setting up this task scheduler and ask for the program, when you say it's going to run a program, we have an executable that it can run. So let's just look to see how we do this. So you're going to find the task scheduler in the control panel, and it's under Administrative Tools. and it's, again, called Task Scheduler. This is showing on the left-hand side of my screen, but in the actual screen it is on the right-hand side. You choose Create Basic Task, or you can choose Create a Task, and there are some more advanced features that you have to address. But for this example, we're just going to create the basic task. Once you create the basic task, it takes you to the wizard, and you enter the name of your task. You can enter a description if you'd like. Click OK. It takes you to the next little section, which is the trigger. And the trigger is just, it's saying, when do you want this to run? Do you want it to run on a daily basis? Do you want it to run on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, one time? Or you can also just have it based on an action rather than a time period. And actions could be when the computer starts, when you log on, or when a specific event is logged. So for this example, we would choose, I'm going to choose the one time if we have the chance to do it. So the example that's pictured here is for one time. You're going to choose the date, so it would be today. I was thinking it was going to be about 2:40, so I'm a little bit behind. So you pick your time, and then you click Next, and then it takes you to your action. And at the action, it says, okay, well, what do you want us to do at this time? Do you want to start a program? Do you want to just display a message? Or do you want to send an email? And you choose. In this case, we chose program. So what I did is I just browsed for the executable that I created out of the simple script that we made. And then that's the end of it. You click Finish, and it's there to run when your time comes along. So let's see if we can actually get this to work. I always hesitate to do this because Murphy of Murphy's Law and I are very good friends. So let's just try it. So I'm going to go into Control Panel, and within the Administrative Tools, I'm going to go down to Task Scheduler. So over here is Create the Basic Task. We'll call it the Task Scheduler. I won't put a description. Oops. Click Next. And again, we're going to just do this one time. And it's 2:48 right now. Whoops, I'm not going to do it for 3:48. Let's do it for 2:49 and make it a little bit later so I have a little bit more time. Okay. Okay, we're going to start a program, and then we want to browse for it. So again, I created a project that I could find it very easily, and here's my executable. This is my ISS file, so that's the actual editable script file. All I had to do was save that very same script and create the exe. So I'm going to choose that, post it in, and choose Next, and then it gives me the final information. So I'll click Finish, and we're going to close this, and we have probably a few seconds before that comes up. So at that point, that concludes the presentation. We'll wait for it to come up, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try and address them. Hopefully I can answer your questions.
Thank you, Erin. While we're waiting for the task scheduler to pop up, again, you can type your questions in the question box. It should be on the right side of your screen towards the bottom. And, oh, it
did. Sorry for the interruption, Lindsay. Thanks.
That was fine.
Go on.
I was just going to say you can type your questions in the question box. As a reminder, we are recording the webcast, so we will send the recording and the slides out hopefully tomorrow, but definitely in the next couple of days. So type your questions in. I'm going to let Erin finish talking about the task scheduler, and then I'll go over the questions.
Okay, so I actually didn't have anything else to say about the task scheduler. Again, just to emphasize that if you are looking to do something that is going to be automated, that you're going to use the task scheduler for, be sure that you are not making it that you're not scripting it so that the user has to touch it a lot. that if there's anything that requires the user to give the script some kind of input or file, and you try to use that using the task scheduler, it's not going to work. It'll run, but it'll stop, and then it'll be waiting for the user forever.
Right.
So just keep that in mind.
Well, thank you for sharing that information with us. We do have one question so far about, I guess if you could go back maybe towards about the middle of the presentation, you were talking about action fields and the action field information. I think that the question was whether, if you could explain a little bit more about how you can use the action field to call a script.
Oh, okay. So let's see. I'll go ahead and open up, see if we can figure something out here to show. So when you set up an action field, I'm going to see if I can pick a okay, I can't think of anything that I can pull up right now. So when you're creating an action field, it does give you the option. There's a radio button in the screen in the setup that says, do you want to display, I think it says display a window, or do you want to run an idea script? It's just two sections of that wizard to set up the action field. So instead of choosing just display the window, if you choose to have it run a script, then you of course have to write the script. You save it as whatever, script to run on action field 1. You save that script. In the setup of that action field, it will ask you to browse to or name the script that it is that's going to run. I'm sure it's browse to it. Browse to the script that's going to run. So you go into your Windows Explorer and select that script that you want to run when somebody clicks on the action field. And then instead of that display, it will actually run another script. So for the travel and entertainment tool that we did, the script would, for instance, if it was total, say total travel expense for the department, and the hyperlink, the action field was on, say, the department name. So when you click on the department name, it runs another script using the data that you tell it to in your new script to, for example, show me then all of the totals for everybody in this department. You know, so it's conditional based on which one they pick, and it will run a new script to do another analysis for that particular item. I don't know. It's just, I don't know if that helps or not.
I'm not seeing.
If that person would like, if that person would like more information, I think is my email somewhere on the announcement?
We can include it in the the email that we'll send out after the presentation with the slides and recording. So if you would like to reach out to Erin directly, that information will be made available to you. And just, you know, as a follow-up, we, or I guess a closing, we do these webcasts with ACUA quarterly as a way to sort of make sure that our ACUA members and IDEA users are getting the most out of IDEA. And the ways these are most successful are when ACUA members volunteer to speak. So if you are interested in participating in a quarterly webcast with ACUA for other ACUA members about IDEA, please let me know and we can share with everybody tips, techniques, knowledge of IDEA, all very important things to have. If you have any questions about being a presenter or any additional questions for Erin or anything else about IDEA, you can email me, lindsayf@automation.com. You'll be receiving an email from me probably tomorrow, if not later in the week, that will have contact information, slides, and the recording. And I think that that's all we have right now, Erin. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Nope, that's all that I have. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you for sharing with us, and thank everybody for joining us. And we are very happy to see you. Have a great afternoon.